Hello, my name is Stephen Upton, and in this short film we're going to take a look at the Hooge crater. Hooge, as indicated by the red arrow, is a very small village just to the east of Ypres in Belgium. During the First World War, it was fought over backwards and forwards throughout the entire duration of the war. By the end of 1914, you can see from this red arrow where the marker is just in front of those red zigzaggy lines. That's the German front line. The British line is the blue dashy line to the left. After detonating craters, you can see the red line has moved forward because they would then occupy the land that they'd just blown up. And this next photograph shows you the craters immediately after one of the detonations, and that's a German soldier stood in it. Today, they're no longer dry, they're full of water. We're now stood on what is known as the Bellward Ridge, looking down towards Ypres. And as you can see, the road slopes down, and that's why this area was so important to everyone. If you held this, you had a view over Ypres. If the British held it, we denied the Germans that same view. And as we turn round now through 180 degrees, there's the Hooge Crater Cemetery on the right of the road, and we're going to now move up to the left. Just to the left of the main road, you see the car in the background, the cemetery is just across the road, and this is the site of the Hooge Crater, the Hooge Craters. I say craters plural because there's several. If you look at the shape of it, it's very clearly, you can see that. The first crater was detonated here on the 21st of February 1915. Prior to that, this was the high point of the Germans' advance in 1914. British and Germans became quite exhausted by the end of November, both dug in, the British just clinging on to the Bellward Ridge. But during the Second Battle of Ypres in early 1915, the Germans captured the entire ridge, pushing us right way back into the lower ground and at a very distinct disadvantage. Just before I continue the history part, if you see there's a coil of rusted barbed wire there, unused, lots of shell cases, an old helmet, and also there's just a little section of a light railway there. You can see that. That's how there's a lot of those used for bringing up munitions, supplies, trench stores. And this part of the former battlefield is strewn with shell cases. Millions of shells were fired, many of them duds, and a lot of the spent shells are just lying all over the place. And this is a German bunker. And this was built after the first crater was created. So 21st of February 1915, as part of the Second Battle of Ypres, the Germans detonated the first crater, captured the far side. They then had their commanding view towards Ypres. Only a couple of months later, in July, a few months later, on the 19th of July, the British detonated their own first mine, the second mine here, and that enabled us to recapture this area. And the British used 1.5 tons of amytol. Move forward just a few days to the 30th of July. The Germans wanted it back, and they deployed a new weapon for the very first time. They called it liquid fire. Just take a note of that supposed field gun. I actually think it's a total fake. I didn't get a chance to get a close look because it started raining, but it looks more like a drain pipe and a piece of metal with a hole in it. But anyway, on the 30th of July 1915, a new terror weapon was used called liquid fire. Today, we call it the flamethrower. And the Germans recaptured this area. As I swing round in a moment, look at the notice board there. It shows you a photograph of this area from 1918, an aerial photograph. Totally devastated. It's what they called the crater field. And this is after the 1917 barrages. You can just see there, that's where I'm stood. The Menin Road is that smudge, and everything else is obliterated. So liquid fire, flamethrowers were used here for the very first time. 30th of July 15. On the 9th of August, just over a month later, 1915, the British, we recaptured it. So as you can see, the battle moved backwards and forwards over this land. That building there is a modern day hotel, and it sits on the site of the former stables of what was Hooge chateau. Just in the background is a ride from the theme park that's there, but that's where the chateau was. The chateau was totally destroyed throughout the war and was never rebuilt. Nailed to this tree is the rusty remains of a rifle, and above it an entrenching tool. But in the battles of October-November 1914, the chateau was occupied by the headquarters of the British 1st and 2nd Divisions, and a German shell exploded right in the middle of one of the rooms, seriously wounding the two commanding generals. In fact, one of them died 6 months later from his wounds. So never let it be said that the British generals commanded from a safe place way behind the lines. Quite a few generals were killed. So the chateau was never rebuilt. Coming back now, the British recaptured it in August 15, and then in the following year, on the 6th of June 1916, the Germans were determined to recapture it, and they actually detonated 4 mines. That's a screw picket. Very useful bit of kit. At the start of the war, you can see the screw bit on the ground, that screws into the ground, and then you string barbed wire from it. But at the start of the war, they had wooden stakes, and they had to be hammered into the ground. And to do this, you are stood up in front of your own trenches in no man's land at night time, bashing away with a mallet, and guess what happens? The other side doesn't like it and it opens up with a machine gun. The screw picket was an amazing invention, and today if you drive around the farmers' fields, thousands of these screw pickets edge their fields with a single strand of barbed wire today, modern barbed wire, and they're still in everyday use. So you'll see thousands of these screw pickets still in use today. Something a lot more peaceful, fortunately. That's a section of light railway. And again, hundreds of shells everywhere. So the Germans detonated 4 mines in June 16, recaptured the area. It was just over a year later, so they held it for over a year, and on the 31st of July 1917, the British launched a major offensive all across this area, known as the Third Battle of Ypres, or as Passchendaele. You can see the soldiers in the bottom of the crater there, creating dugouts. A couple of wrecked tanks. So on the 31st of July 17, the Passchendaele offensive commenced. Another rusty rifle and a bayonet screwed to a tree. And on the first day of Third Ypres, this was recaptured again. And the British held on to it until the 21st of March 1918, when the Germans launched another offensive, recapturing it. And also capturing all the ground we saw in the opening footage of the road towards Ypres, right the way down to a place known as Hellfire Corner. This is where the Ypres Rulers Railway crossed the Menin Road. They advanced all the way down to there, right up to in front of Ypres. And that area now is actually, the railway's gone, and it's a big roundabout. The old railway line's been converted into a road. Because I remember visiting that back in the 70s and 80s when it was still a railway line. I wish I'd photographed it then. And finally, in September, on the 28th of September 1918, the British launched the final offensive of the war, where we recaptured it and pushed the Germans all the way back until the 11th of November, when the armistice was called. Here you can see trenches that have been dug out. This area, for the whole duration of the war, was fought over backwards and forwards so many times, constantly shelled. It had to be, for those 4 years, probably one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Thousands of soldiers, both British, German, and when I say British, please don't misunderstand me. I am including all the soldiers from what was then the British Empire. Many Australians and Canadians fought here, South Africans, from the entire empire, but rather than list them all, we just simply say British. In those days, they thought of themselves as British very often. Today, of course, it's the British Commonwealth for many. But thousands of soldiers fought and died here to capture these just a very small piece of land. That metal plate with the hole, that's what a sniper would use. It's a little loophole. It's standing upon in front of his trench, poke his rifle through it, and try to shoot people in the opposing trenches. If ever you get opportunity to visit this area, it's well worth staying in the hotel, and then you can take a walk round these trenches. Now, what I'm picking up is a great lump of shrapnel. Look how thick it is. It's over 1 inch thick, and I can assure you that was quite heavy. Imagine that flying around after the shell explodes at several thousand feet per second. No one's going to survive being hit by that. Now, waterlogged, typical trenches in this area. Sometimes, particularly in the winter, they're up to their waists in mud and water. The first part of the film where I'm out on the road was filmed in June of 2019, and the walk around the trenches, I managed to complete this in January 2020. That's why the weather conditions are very different. If you're interested in what I used, I'm using an iPhone 10 mounted upon an Osmo 2 mobile. That's another German blockhouse. Now imagine these as not just water-filled lakes, but as big holes in the ground. And then you can see why there's many dugouts dug into the sides of it. Those, of course, all filled with water now. Many of the trenches would have looked like that. Mud. If you've enjoyed this short film, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just do a search for Stephen, spelt with a V, Upton, Upton. I've done many films using handheld and drones, mostly on the First World War. So, as it starts to rain now, I packed in early. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found it not just interesting, but also educational. And all of my films are done to the memory of all those, regardless of nationality, who served their countries in times of conflict. We shall remember them.